Yo, what's up, guys? James here. Welcome to the second part in our tutorial series for combat animation for video games. In the first part, we looked at kind of the planning process that I use before jumping into Maya and starting to animate. And in this video, we'll take quite a vanilla, generic kind of sword attack. We'll break it down and have a look at the kind of things that makes it a good attack, and also look at some of the things that we should try and avoid. Some of the things that might make it less visually good, but also less effective in a game as a playable animation. Yeah, so let's do it. So, right, imagine you've been given a piece of animation to do. It's your task. You've done your kind of planning process. You've thought about what you're going to animate. You've done some research. Maybe done a couple of thumbnail poses. You kind of got a good idea of what you want to do in your head, and you start working in Maya. So the first thing that I usually do is figure out the timing, figure out like how long the animation is going to take, and the first, I guess the most important thing is the strike point. And in this particular animation, the strike point's from frame 8. Usually the designer wants something fast and responsive, and in order for it to feel good in the game, it needs to be very quick and very clear. Remember, we talked about clarity in the previous video, and so basically we have 8 frames to get from his neutral standing, very generic looking idle pose into actually hitting an opponent, if you imagine an opponent's kind of there. And that's not a lot of frames. In like TV animation or movie animation, we think about an anticipation and we carry out an action. In 8 frames, and also as a playable animation, it's very difficult to fit all that information into 8 frames. And we don't want to overcomplicate things. We need to be as clear and straight to the point as possible. I won't talk about it too much, but for NPC animations, like non-playable characters, the rules are slightly different. But generally, we need it to be very, very quick. So a thing that I like to do is kind of build the anticipation into the forward movement. So you see here, he is anticipating. He's grabbing his sword, and he's kind of like leaning back. And the reason why he's leaning back is because I want the shape change. I want the strong contrast between his idle pose and this point where he's leaning forward and he's putting his weight into this attack. Up until frame 5, I'd say that's anticipation. And then suddenly we get the burst of energy and the transfer of weight forward. So, backing up a bit, the first poses that I put together when I'm animating a combat piece of animation is obviously the idle pose, strike pose, and then the final pose. And then, well, actually, usually the settle pose. It sometimes is very similar to the strike pose, not always. But in this case, it's kind of like it's quite similar. So that's 1, 2, 3 poses, and I put those poses down, and then I play with the timing and see generally where I want to keep them. And that's not really negotiable. You can try and argue with designers, but it makes sense for it to be very quickly, to be very quick. So yeah, once I've done that, I put my poses down and I start trying to work out the animation. And like I said before, we want it to always be moving forward. As a playable character, progression is really important. And I see a lot of animation in games, maybe not so much nowadays, but I used to see a lot where the combat felt very stiff and it felt very undynamic. It was lacking kind of like that kinetic energy, and a lot of the time it was because characters were kind of fighting on the spot. They weren't moving forward as they attack, and they don't have to move forward like to here or to here. But to get that sense of like you're making progress, you're moving forward, I think that's pretty important. It gives a sense of momentum and inertia that you can carry on, especially if it's a combo. But the fact that he's moving forward here gives us good opportunity to have a contrast in shape. I mean, if you look at the line of action here, it's kind of like arching backwards. Contrast that with this one, where he's arching forwards. And that's within a matter of a few frames. And that's what gives us the snap and the power. It makes it feel like he's really kind of like dragging the sword over him and swiping. An important point that I need to make is that in video games, these poses that you create, they need to look great from every angle, or as many angles as possible. It's very difficult sometimes, but generally, if it's a playable character, then you're going to be seen kind of like from behind. So our silhouettes need to be really, really strong. And once you've done those 3 poses, especially this pose, incel pose, then that's over 50% done. There's not much you can fit into 8 frames. There's not much you want to. So yeah, that's kind of like the pose pass that I like to start with. One other thing I probably should mention is depending on the style of the game, this kind of stuff is going to vary. So where this is, I tried to make this kind of in between kind of extreme and also very realistic and natural. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's got a little bit of naturalism to it, but it's also, there is the poses are quite extreme. So your mileage may vary. It depends on what kind of game you're working on. But the basic concepts, they still apply, for sure. I mean, you want to get something as dynamic as possible, and test it as much as possible in the game, because it needs to feel, like you can. So many times I'd be messing around in Maya and creating something that looks really cool, but then when you get into the game and you're mashing buttons and playing those animations through those button presses, and it just feels horrible. So iteration and testing as much as possible is really important. Anyway, so after this, I've created my poses. He's attacked, and then now he needs to kind of
get back into his default pose. Here I've done it really basic. I've done it really generically, just for clarity's sake. But if the game allows it, this point is actually the best chance to show off the character's character. So, for example, if he's really arrogant and kind of a show off, he can, he can rise really slowly and kind of maybe rest his sword on his shoulder a bit, kind of leer over his opponent, kind of look cool as he's doing it. Or if he's really angry and aggressive, he kind of flick the blood off his sword as he's standing up and getting back into that default pose. There's so much you can do. Usually you'd need to get back into the default pose fairly quickly, but it depends. And you'd probably be able to break out of this animation anyway, in terms of if you press forward on the controller while this animation is playing, he'd just break out into a walk or run. So take advantage of these little moments where you can kind of really sell his personality and his character.
Right. So once we've done our pose pass, usually I've done that, and I kind of worked out the timing and stuff, and then I go ahead and start breaking it down and putting in all the nice little extra bits of secondary animation and all that kind of stuff. Actually, I should probably mention that I work straight into spline. I know a lot of people, they work in constant or kind of linear, and then they go straight into spline after that. But and I get that. I used to be a hand-drawn traditional animator, so I get that kind of sentiment. But I guess the two main reasons why I work straight in spline is one, I work very kind of clean anyway. That leading to that, there's not much complication. Even if I don't in between, even if I don't break it down and have this anticipation, it's gonna fairly smoothly transition from that pose to that pose. And and the second reason is that I usually key on 4s or 5s, so my keys are usually fairly close together, and at that point it really doesn't make too much of a difference if you're working in constant or you're working in spline. Maya doesn't have much of a chance to screw up, if you don't give it much chance to. But everyone does it their own way, and that's fine. Anyway, so done my poses, broken it down. I start thinking about every individual limb and making it flow nicely, making each pose, even the breakdowns, look clear, adding some nice extra finger animation, or overlapping the arms. Really kind of think about the inertia of the sword, getting dragged out and pulled down. See how he's using his whole body to drag the sword down, not just his arm. The sword just kind of flicks around at the end, and then he holds it, he pulls back on it. And you can see that in his body as he's pulling back on it for it to stop. The momentum pulled his head down, and now he's kind of adjusting himself. So all that kind of stuff comes after the pose pass and you've broken it down, and it helps keep it alive. Because this this pose here is held pretty much from, say, frame 12 to here, and that's done for clarity's sake, and also for an input window. So if a player wants to carry on this attack into a combo, you need to give the guy a little bit of time to be able to press the button. So you need to keep the animation alive by following through with each limb, keeping that weight going. You see the overlap on his fingers and his hand as it comes down. And there's not really that much to this, and I wanted to keep it simple and as clear as possible for you guys. But that's generally it. And once I'm happy with it, then I put it into the game and give it a go and see if it works. Usually the problems come from the beginning part of the animation. You need it to feel like when you press that button, he's kind of springs into action and does the attack. And like I said, for NPC animations, it's a little bit different. I'll probably go into that in the next video. So that's probably it for this video. In the next video, I will go into a lot more detail with, I guess, just the extras. This is kind of a fundamentals tutorial video. This is the core stuff that you need to know. In the next video, I'll probably talk about combos and maybe aerial combat as well, and then go into a little bit more detail with regards to pose and timing rhythms and kind of all the extra advanced stuff. But really, this is the meat and potatoes. This is the main stuff that you kind of need to know. Hopefully, it's good enough for you guys. Hopefully, you've learned a little bit and enjoyed the video. And I'll see you next time.